Ovid's Metamorphoses tells the story of Narcissus, a young man who spurned romantic overtures to gaze endlessly at his reflection in a pool of water. Today, his name defines a highly specific psychological trait. The narcissistic personality is defined by a behavioral contradiction. It combines a pervasive, grandiose sense of superiority with an intense emotional vulnerability and a constant need to be validated by other people. The dynamic self-regulatory processing model posits that grandiosity is not a stable feature. It's a precarious structure requiring constant external maintenance. Keeping it upright is a zero-sum game, continuously comparing oneself favorably to others. For every winner, there must be a loser. This mechanical requirement dictates an adversarial interpersonal orientation. Narcissists will manipulate, use, and condescend to the people around them to extract the validation they need, a dynamic that reliably burns through their relationships. Narcissism operates as a chronic state of a self under construction, demanding a continuous supply of admiration that exacts heavy collateral damage on everyone else. The origins of this precarious psychological structure lie in early childhood development, and here the clinical theories diverge sharply. The early object relations and self-psychology theories form the psychoanalytic model. They argue that an inflated self-you is a compensatory defense mechanism erected by a child to survive a lack of parental warmth or affection. Social learning theory takes the exact opposite stance. It posits that children acquire their self-views directly from their own parents. In this model, narcissism stems from the internalization of parental overvaluation, being treated as if they are uniquely special and entitled. Does a child develop an obsession with superiority to compensate for a lack of love, or do they develop it because their parents fed them a diet of inflated praise? Resolving this debate dictates the entire clinical approach to the condition. It means the exact difference between trying to heal deep-seated childhood emotional trauma and working to correct distorted social conditioning. Finding the answer starts by identifying when the condition actually begins. True trait narcissism generally cannot emerge in children before roughly age 8. Before this threshold, young children lack the required cognitive machinery. By middle childhood, they cross two key milestones. They learn to form global representations of themselves as a person, and they learn to evaluate themselves from the perspective of others. This chart illustrates the developmental threshold where self-evaluation begins. To test the origin theories at this juncture, researchers designed a longitudinal study. They tracked a sample of children ages 7 to 12 alongside their parents, measuring psychological profiles across 4 distinct 6-month waves. The researchers isolated 2 specific parental behaviors. First, warmth, how often parents shared joy, spent time, and showed affection. Second, overvaluation, the tendency of parents to overestimate their child's IQ, overclaim their knowledge, and insist on their specialness. Capturing this data in real time is strictly necessary. If you ask an adult narcissist to recall their childhood, their pervasive self-enhancement tendencies distort the data. They feel admired by everyone, so they naturally report that their parents admired them. This graph tracks self-views over 4 waves. Parental warmth reliably predicts child self-esteem. Children internalize they are inherently worthy. But a separate line shows parental overvaluation solely predicts child narcissism. By overestimating performance, the child internalizes themselves as a superior, entitled being. This finding explicitly falsifies the psychoanalytic model's core assumption. A lack of parental warmth did not predict narcissism in the cohort. Because the study was longitudinal, the temporal direction of the data is clear. Overvaluation preceded and predicted the child's narcissism. The children did not possess pre-existing narcissistic traits that somehow lured their parents into overvaluing them. Self-esteem and narcissism operate on entirely separate pathways. Warmth breeds a stable sense of self-worth. Overvaluation breeds a precarious addiction to superiority. These findings confront a persistent clinical and popular objection. If narcissists aren't compensating for a lack of childhood love, do they secretly hate themselves deep down inside? This matrix tests if narcissists secretly hate themselves. Researchers compared conscious, explicit ratings against subconscious, implicit tests. In the agentic domain, competence and intelligence, narcissists score incredibly high explicitly and implicitly. In the communal domain, warmth and agreeableness, their scores are neutral. They don't prioritize communal traits. To verify this, researchers utilized a bogus pipeline procedure, attaching subjects to fake lie detectors. When forced to be truthful, narcissists admit to lowering their consciously inflated self-reports, but they do not reveal any hidden negative self-views. The deep-seated insecurity is a myth. The narcissistic self-concept is highly positive, but it is deeply imbalanced. They value their own agency and competence far more than their ability to get along with others. They crave external validation, not to soothe feelings of inner worthlessness, but because maintaining an imbalanced, highly agentic status requires constant confirmation from the people around them. But if overvaluation is the primary environmental driver, that leaves an open question. Why doesn't every overvalued child grow up to be a narcissist? The answer lies in biology, specifically approach temperament, an early emerging constitutional sensitivity to rewarding stimuli. Some children's nervous systems are simply hyper-reactive to desirable outcomes. This visualizes the diathesis stress model of narcissism. Here, parental overvaluation acts as the environmental stressor, the external catalyst. High approach temperament acts as the diathesis, the latent biological vulnerability, making the child hyper-receptive to praise. Narcissism is forged at a specific intersection. You take a child biologically wired to seek intense sensory rewards, and you place them in an environment that conditions them to view superiority as the ultimate reward. When that childhood dependency carries over into adulthood, it manifests in behaviors that closely mirror substance dependency, a framework known as the addiction model. Look at the precarious self-structure again. The intense, constant longing for the desirable stimuli of admiration and attention is classified here as cravings. The frantically added blocks of validation are the fix. Over time, the effect of the validation decreases. This is tolerance. The individual requires an increased dosage, more admiration from more sources on more occasions, just to keep the pillar standing. When that external validation is denied, the structure collapses. This triggers withdrawal, resulting in the severe internalizing emotions, shame, and hostile aggression commonly observed when a narcissist is criticized. Because the narcissistic self-view is built entirely on comparative superiority, rather than a foundation of inherent worth, the adult personality functions mechanically like an addiction. This mechanical loop corrects a final clinical misconception. It is common to divide narcissists into two rigid types: the extroverted, aggressive, grandiose narcissist, and the introverted, anxious, vulnerable narcissist. This diagram maps how those manifestations actually work. They are not static personality types. They are fluid states that a single individual oscillates between, anchored by a constant core of adversarial self-enhancement. Under the addiction framework, grandiosity is simply the state of being high on validation. Vulnerability is the state of withdrawal. Narcissism is a derailment of normal self-development. The data shows it is not born of early trauma or masked self-loathing. It emerges when environmental overvaluation collides with a biological sensitivity to reward. By abandoning the myth of masked insecurity and mapping the precise diathesis stress and addiction models, researchers can stop treating the symptoms of a bruised ego and finally target the mechanical origins of the condition itself.